Americans' trust in societal institutions is plummeting, especially when it comes to the fourth estate. According to a Gallup poll from last year, people actually trust banks more than they do newspapers or TV news in this country. But the distrust of the mainstream has paved the way for a renaissance of alternative media to flourish. And perhaps there's no better example than the Young Turks. The Young Turks is a purely online network of shows and political commentary that has become one of the most popular channels on YouTube with over 1 billion views. Well, earlier today, I was joined by the founder, host of the Young Turks, and former MSNBC anchor, Cenk Uygur, to discuss why his media platform is far more successful than the corporate media will ever be. I first asked him about the behind-the-scenes story concerning his departure from the corporate press.
Well, I got a speech a couple months before they made the switch on time slots saying that I needed to be more pro-establishment. Literally, that's exactly what they told me, which was amazing to me. And they said, you know, outsiders are cool, but that's not who we are. This is NBC, we're insiders. And they said that Washington was not happy with my tone. So I'm always amused by people who think that the cable news operators here in America are totally independent. Oh, it's funny how under the thumb that other channels are of governments, etc. Our own channels are under the thumb of our own government.
Right, and of course, you know, people guffaw at the notion of censorship. Oh, I don't self-censor, says Piers Morgan. But, you know, Cenk, you bring up a good point, which is that we have this corporate media apparatus that is actually towing the line of the establishment. Should that be scary to people? Because, of course, people give RT a lot of flack for towing the line of the Russian foreign policy perspective. But here we have a media apparatus entirely funded by corporations that's towing the line of the U.S. government. Should that be concerning?
Yeah, I actually think in some ways it's more concerning because, of course, a giant corporation like Comcast has its own, you know, needs. Comcast owns MSNBC at this point. And they're going to drive in that direction and not necessarily in the direction of what serves the audience best. But they're also intertangled with the government. So, for example, they're right now in the middle of trying to acquire the second largest cable operator. They're, of course, the largest in the country. And in order to do that, they're going to need the permission of the government. So it might help if they were friendly with the government. The previous owner of NBC was GE, one of the largest defense contractors in the country. So they have a ton of contracts that are related to the government. So those things are, as I personally witnessed, totally intertwined with one another. And so to give you more detail on what happened with me, you know, they said, okay, we're going to move you to the weekends and out of prime time at 6 o'clock. And I remember in the conversation I asked, look, are my ratings okay? Full well knowing the answer that they were actually the best ratings that they had at 6 o'clock until then. And of course the answer was yes, your ratings are excellent. And I said, if you move me to the weekends, if I've done everything you've asked internally, right, and it's not the content and it's not the ratings, well, then what is it? And it was met with about 30 seconds of the most awkward silence you've ever heard in your life. So yes, they're intertangled, and yes, they make decisions based on that. And if Piers Morgan doesn't realize that, he's got his, you know, head buried in the sand.
Well, I think people like Piers Morgan, maybe they don't think that they self-censor because they're just super generic and have been kind of groomed for this position because they toe the line so well. I mean, maybe that says a lot about who these people are. But what does it say about the future of this kind of media machine? I mean, CNN, for example, fired over 40 people to replace them with entertainment journalists, and their new model is going to reality TV.
Yeah, you know, there's so many different parts of that. First of all, I think a lot of people on TV are good people, and they don't even quite realize that they're part of this machine. But what happened was they got promoted because they towed the line. Mm-hmm. They think that they got promoted because they were so good on TV. But the reality is most of the people who stuck their head out, like Ashley Banfield was basically literally in her MSNBC days put in a closet because she spoke out against the Iraq war. Now that was back when MSNBC was conservative, right? And so what the person who got the promotion above Ashley Banfield doesn't realize is they got that promotion because they didn't say anything against the Iraq war. They didn't say anything against the government. They didn't say anything about how corporate money totally and utterly controls our politics. So that's how the system moves people up that are willing to play ball and moves people down if they're not. Now, to the idea of the entertainment taking over cable news, look, and I don't mind entertainment news on the Young Turks. We do entertainment news, but it's got its place, right? And if you're supposed to be the most trusted name in news, you should do some news, right? And so for CNN, let me ask an interesting question for you. When's the last time they broke a really interesting investigative story about the government?
I can't remember.
I'll give you a couple of years to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, the lockup on MSNBC is enough, but now that CNN's going to go half reality, you're right. I mean, these 24-hour news channels, it's like, what is going on here? I mean, and of course, that one story that the mainstream just can't get enough of is this missing plane. I swear to God, every time I look at the TV, they have toy planes holding it up, and trying to figure out what happened. Completely speculative. We're not learning anything new. Why is a ghost plane garnered so much nonstop speculative coverage, Cenk?
Yeah, look, on the Young Turks, we're in the news business, right? And we do commentary, there's no question about that. And we're very clear with our audience as to what our perspective is. But at least we try to cover the news, and all of the news. So that also means some lighter stuff. We have a whole sports channel, et cetera. But you've got to actually cover all of the news. So when they focus on the plane and only the plane, well, they're doing a great disservice to the rest of the news. Basically, they're saying, we're not really covering the news. We're going to cover whatever is entertaining in the news nonstop, 24/7, because that's what gets us ratings. And yes, CNN's ratings have gone up during this missing plane situation because it's basically reality television. It's a soap opera, and that's how they're covering it. Substantive news is not what they're interested in.
There was even an anchor kind of speculating that it might have disappeared with supernatural causes, Cenk. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Oh, sure.
And I know that you've, of course, covered the whole ordeal with the CIA spying on the Senate Intelligence Committee. How crazy is the level of paranoia on the Hill that the CIA is now spying on its own watchdogs?
Yeah, look, what I love about that story is that the Senate, especially Dianne Feinstein, goes and says, well, look, when we're spying in on you, the NSA is doing that, and we found out because of Edward Snowden's revelations. Well, that's perfectly fine. They had to do it. She literally said there are very big bombs out there. Well, okay. Then 300 million Americans had to be spied in on. But it turns out when the intelligence community is spying in on her, oh, she doesn't like that at all. All of a sudden, it's a whole different ballgame. That might be unconstitutional. You don't say, Senator Feinstein. Yes, that's what we've been saying, and Edward Snowden's been saying all along.
Cenk, the Young Turks has turned into an online powerhouse. I mean, you guys are incredible. You have over 1 billion views on your channel. Why do you think the media venture has been so enormously successful?
Well, we're just filling a market need. You know, the conservative free market types should love us. So the market need was truth and actually serving the audience rather than sponsors, corporate parents, or the government. And the reason that we now are, you know, over 1.5 billion views is because people go, whoa, look at that. They're doing it with a prompter, they're unscripted, they're real, they're not fake robots on TV, and most importantly, they're not just telling us what the government wants us to hear, they're telling us the actual news.
Yeah, Cenk, that's what I like about watching you and Anna. It just seems like we're sitting down and, you know, in our house, just talking to a few friends and kind of really getting into the heart of what people really think. I mean, average people about these stories. It seems like only a few people have been able to figure out a sustainable business model for independent media. Very, very tough right now, an abysmal state of media right now in the country. What's your advice for those trying to start up their own media outlets?
Well, so our plan is actually to change the entire media. So how's that for ambitious? and we want to do that through simply doing what we do because I think it'll create two different paths. One is for young startups, they'll say, well, look, if I want to succeed online, which is the only place you can go without gatekeepers, well, obviously the successful model is the Young Turks. So maybe we should do something similar to what they did. So great. But I actually believe that at this point we've been successful enough, and going forward we'll be even more successful as the rates of our audience continues to grow every single month, that the mainstream media will turn, as some of them already have, and behind the scenes talk to us and say, okay, you guys win. What are you doing right? And then we can tell them, serve the audience, don't serve the government, and hopefully they will copy us, because that's what the one thing that the media is really good at, copying success. So we hope we can change them by just being successful enough.
Exactly. You're just doing what the people want to hear, actually. Giving the real news. What a concept. And of course, as you know, I know that you've been following it. Thank you so much for that awesome video breaking down the Piers Morgan thing. But, you know, I was involved in one of my own media controversies worldwide a couple of weeks ago. Since then, it seems like this network is constantly in the crosshairs of the U.S. media. I've come out and criticized the coverage of Crimea from all sides. Were you surprised to see this story kind of spun out to discredit RT ultimately, instead of just a discussion, a broader discussion about journalistic integrity and editorial freedom across all media outlets?
Look, if people were honest and they criticized and questioned, the funding of RT, Al Jazeera, and CNN, right, all of those outlets, then I would say, look, those are legitimate questions that need to be answered, right? But that's not what they're doing. Instead, what they're doing is, look at RT, tut, 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 as if they're better than RT and that they're somehow more objective and they don't cater to their government, which is ridiculous. CNN has lost so much credibility all across the world because everybody knows that they cater to the U.S. government. When's the last time CNN questioned the government? This is not what they do. So, look, let's take an example of you and me, right? You criticize the Russian actions in Crimea. You're still on RT. I criticize the Obama administration and the U.S. government on MSNBC. I'm no longer on MSNBC. So who has the freer media?
Yeah. And Cenk, I think that you remember as well as I do that when Al Jazeera first started, I mean, I remember neoconservatives calling it a terrorist network. I mean, and now it's gained a lot more credibility, but it's just amazing, the vitriol against kind of alternative outlets than the corporate media. Cenk, of course, the war on words being waged all over the networks, Russia versus the U.S. I just feel like it's the Cold War 2.0 here. I mean, do you think that there's a concerted effort, propaganda-wise, to reignite the Cold War? Because I sure do.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's so hard to get propaganda-free news out of what's happening in Ukraine, Crimea, Russia, etc. The Russians have their own, points that they want to push forward. The Americans in the West have their points that they want to push forward, and they do it in so many different ways. And, I don't know what Russia's motivations are other than taking Crimea, which they clearly have, right, at this point, with the referendum going 97% in their favor. I don't know if they want to be more aggressive militarily, territorially, etc. But I do know there's a significant contingent inside the U.S. who loves war. And that's, of course, partly what Eisenhower warned us about, the military-industrial complex. The more war we have, and the more just the threat of war creates a panic situation where we have to do more and more defense spending. So those guys have a lot of lobbyists, and they have a lot of power in Washington. So some people make a lot of money and love it when we beat the drums of war.
Right, no doubt. I mean, there's tons of think tanks here that are just constantly fear-mongering us, shifted over from the Middle East now to Russia, and it's no joke, Cenk. I really hope that we can scale back, push peace, push diplomacy. Thank you so much. You're amazing. Thank you so much for coming on today. Cenk Uygur, on the heels of the earthquake there in L.A., host of the Young Turks. Everyone check it out.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you for your strong convictions. We appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Americans' trust in societal institutions is plummeting, especially when it comes to the fourth estate. Purely online network of shows and political commentary that has become one of the most popular channels on YouTube with over 1 billion views. Well, earlier today, I was joined by the founder, host of the Young Turks, and former MSNBC anchor, Cenk Uygur, to discuss why his media platform is far more successful than the corporate media will ever be. I first asked him about the behind-the-scenes story concerning his departure from the corporate press.
Well, I got a speech a couple months before they made the switch on time slots, saying that I needed to be more pro-establishment.
According to a Gallup poll from last year, people actually trust banks more than they do newspapers or TV news in this country. But the distrust of the mainstream has paved the way for a renaissance of alternative media to flourish. And perhaps there's no better example than the Young Turks. The Young Turks is a...
Literally, that's exactly what they told me, which was amazing to me. And they said, outsiders are cool, but that's not who we are. This is NBC, we're insiders. And they said that Washington was not happy with my tone. So I'm always amused by people